Hey, this is Mrs. Robinson here to review solving equations with you. We're going to go over solving one-step equations with rational numbers or rational coefficients. So let's go ahead and get into it. So let's go over a little bit of terminology. It's really important that you know what we're saying to you um, when we use these things. So rational numbers, they're numbers that can be written in the form of a fraction. Okay, we talked about the real number system, rational and irrational numbers. So if you need a review on that, you can go ahead and look at your foldable about rational numbers. Variables. Variables are a letter or symbol used to represent an unknown quantity. So we use variables all the time. You actually were using variables when you were younger. I love the fact that my husband brings this up. When you guys are in elementary school, it says like box plus 4 equals 6. So you're like, what number goes in the box? Well, that box used to be your variable. Now we're using letters. We're getting more advanced. We're starting to use letters to represent our unknown quantities. Because as we keep moving, sometimes we have more than one unknown quantity, or sometimes that unknown quantity is used in more than one situation. So we're now starting to use letters. Coefficient, the value next to the variable. So sometimes you see a variable and it has a number next to it. Well, that number is known as the coefficient, and what that represents is multiplication. That variable is being multiplied by that number on the outside. Golden rule of algebra. So for us to keep the equations balanced, the golden rule of algebra is simply what you do to one side, you must do to the other. All right? The equal sign is where the equation, that tipping scale is like it's actually the middle point where they meet. And so whenever you move something from one side of the equal sign to the, you have to do it on the other side as well. So you got to make sure whatever you do on one side, you must do on the, you should have said other. All right, term. A term is a number, variable, or a combination of numbers and variables that are separated by operators. Operators are like plus, minus, times, and divide. So those separate out terms. And terms are made up of number and variables, and you know what those are. Inverse operations, the opposite operation. So we talked about inverse operations. You should have a foldable on that. So plus is the inverse of minus, and minus is the inverse of plus. Multiplication is the inverse operation of division, and division is the inverse operation of multiplication. Roots are the inverse operation of powers, and powers are the inverse operation of roots. So you needed to know these things and make sure you're kind of strong in them so that you know what we're talking about. So some things you'll need in order to be successful during this lesson, you're going to need to know addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, and you probably want paper and pencil. All right? Our purpose in doing this, our purpose is to isolate a variable and determine the value that represents it. Okay? So here I just chose two random variables, the box with the box inside and the question mark. So right now my thick box is equal to question mark. I don't know. I just put something so you can get something there. I didn't want to confuse you with letters and numbers just yet. Let's go into that now. All right, so we got this problem. 5 plus y equals 10. Now I know you're looking at this problem. You say, I know how to do this already. I've seen this before. Duh, 5 plus that number equals 10. I'm not going to say the number out loud because I want to solve this problem. I want to solve this equation. So we're going to go through the steps for solving an equation. So the first thing you must do is rewind. We got to work backwards. We got to figure out we have to undo what we did. That's what rewind means, okay? So when we undo what we just did and we subtract 5 from both sides because we had a positive 5, so we're going to subtract 5 from each side of this equation, and we're going to bring down the things that didn't get canceled. So 5 minus 5 is 0, so I can cross that out. I have a y. I bring down my equal sign, and 10 minus 5 is 5. I am now at my solve stage because I've isolated the y all by itself, and I now know that y is equal to 5. Okay? Now, what if I'm unsure? Right now we're at that very simple one-step equation. Well, I can always check my work. So what I'm going to do is I know that y equals 5. So I'm going to go back to my original problem. Wherever I see a y, I'm going to put 5 in. So I'm going to rewrite my original problem. Wherever I had a y, I'm going to actually put that value, that solve value in there. So 5 plus 5, and what I'm hoping it equals is 10. So 5 plus 5 equals, and I put a little question mark above the equal sign because I don't know if it's equal yet. I'm not sure. 10. So 5 plus 5, 5 plus 5 is 10, equals 10. Are they equal? Yes, so I can put a check mark through it. All right? That was a simple one-step equation. You got this. Let's do a few more. Okay, our next problem is y minus 7 equals negative 7.8. So the first thing that we have to do, you guessed it, we have to rewind. So if we were to rewind, the one that we want to rewind and do is this minus 7. So if we were to work backwards, instead of taking 7 away, we're going to add 7 to both sides. So if I add 7 to both sides, that leaves me with y equals negative 0.8. Since I only have y on the left side, everything else on the right is going to equal y. So I'm now at my solve stage. Perfect. I'm done. These are one-step equations. Now I need to make sure my answer is right. So I got to check my work. So what I'm going to do is rewrite my original problem. Wherever I see a y, I am going to replace that with what y equaled originally, which is negative 0.8. So I have negative 0.8 minus 7. I'm trying to see if it's equal to negative 7.8. Negative 0.8 minus 7 equals negative 7.8, and both sides are equal, so that looks like it's correct. So this is true. All right, how about we try another one that looks a little different? Okay, we have 5y equals negative 4. If you look right here, this one looks a little different because I don't have any pluses or minuses on the left side or the right side. I have a negative symbol in front of my 4, but there's no other number there. So this problem right here, since the number and letter are next to each other, this is actually multiplication. Whenever you see variables and numbers together, they represent multiplication. So when we're doing our rewind stage, we actually have to do the opposite of multiplication, or I call them being married. So the opposite of multiplication or being married, unfortunately, is we need division or we need to get a divorce. That's working backwards in this particular problem. So we have 5y divided by 5 and negative 4 divided by 5 because we have to use the golden rule of algebra, which is what I do to one side, I have to do to the other. So the 5's cancel out. I'm left with y divided by negative 4 over 5. Since I have y isolated, everything else on the other side of the equal sign is the value of y. So that was my solve stage. I've just solved this equation. Now I need to check to see if everything is correct. So I'm going to rewrite my original problem, and everywhere that I see the variable y, I'm going to replace it with what y equaled. Y equaled negative 4 over 5. The reason I put it in parentheses is because I want to make sure that I have everything nice and contained, and understand that the 5 that's outside the parentheses has to be multiplied by everything that I'm inserting in place of y. So I have 5 times negative 4 over 5, trying to see if it's equal to if it's going to equal negative 4 to find out if this is true. So 5 and 5 in the denominator, those two, they cancel each other out, and I'm actually just left with negative 4. Well, since both sides are negative 4, it looks like they are equal, and this is true. All right, let's try one more. So we have 5 over 8 times y equals negative 1 half. So you know we have to work backwards. We have to do that rewind. And I've already told you, hey, when you see a number next to a letter, that is multiplication. And the opposite, or they're married, and the opposite of that is, unfortunately, we got to separate them. We need a divorce. But wait, we do not divorce or divide fractions. We never divide fractions. We multiply by what's called the reciprocal. And the reciprocal is simply when you take the top number, put it on the bottom, take the bottom number, and put it on the top, and you multiply it by that. This is the rewind stage when we're dealing with fractions. And of course, the golden rule of algebra is whatever I do to one side, I have to do to the other. All right, so the reciprocal of 5 over 8 is 8 over 5. So the 8's cross cancel, the 5's cross cancel. I am left with y on the left side. And then I have negative half times 8 over 5. Well, 2 and 8, the greatest common factor between those two crosses is 2. So 2 divided by 2 is 1, and 8 divided by 2 is 4. And since I now have 1 over 1. The other side is 4 over 5, and I continue to keep that. So my answer is negative 4 over 5. So I think I just solved my problem because y is isolated. So you know what's next. We have to check. I start with my original problem. 5 over 8y equals negative half. Wherever I see a y, I'm going to replace that with the value of negative 4 over 5. I put it in parentheses again to make sure I have everything that I needed that completes the whole value of y. So I can start to simplify to see if both sides of the equation are equal. Well, the 5 in the numerator and the 5 in the denominator, they cross cancel, and they each will be 1. The 8 in the denominator and the 4 in the numerator, the greatest common factor is 4. So 8 divided by 4 is 2. 4 divided by 4 is 1. So I have 1 times a negative 1, that's going to be negative 1. And then I have 2 times 1, that's going to be 2. So I'll have negative half, and the other side is negative half. So it looks like they're equal. Once again, it's true. All right, so we have proven ourselves for each one of these one-step equations that we just tried. So here are some things to remember. Golden rule of algebra: to keep the equations balanced, what you do to one side, you must do to the other. We got those inverse operations that we have to remember. The opposite of plus is minus. The opposite of multiplication is division, or the opposite of being married is divorce. And the opposite of roots are exponents, or the opposite of exponents are roots. All right. The steps for solving one-step equations: we're using rewind, solve, and check right now. Remember, the reciprocal is that we flip the numerator and the denominator of a fraction or a number, and when that new number is multiplied by the original, the value will equal 1 after you cross cancel everything. Also, remember the rule for dividing or divorcing fractions. We do not divide fractions. We multiply by the reciprocal. If you want to try some practice, test yourself out. I tried playing this game, Math Pong. I suggest maybe selecting Computer 4. Once you go in, you'll know what I'm talking about. You can use the link here. And I hope that this was helpful. Have a great night.